West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël.
It was June 2020, just days after police murdered George Floyd in Minneapolis. The Black Lives Matter demonstrations of that summer were just taking off, including in Washington, D.C., across from the White House in Lafayette Square. On the evening of June the 1st, Trump spoke from the White House Rose Garden, promising law and order in the face of the protests. And as Trump was speaking, law enforcement across the street in Lafayette Square was already carrying out that law and order.
Tear gas is now being fired. You can see what's going on. The police are moving. They're trying to disperse this crowd that has gathered at Lafayette Park. Clearly, they don't want these protesters to be there, even though they were peaceful.
Authorities violently cleared demonstrators with smoke bombs, pepper spray, and officers on horseback. Their clearing of the square allowed a famously devout president to visit nearby St. John's Church for a photo op. The violence against mostly peaceful protesters was shocking, appalling. But Republicans wanted to see more of it. 2 days after Lafayette Square, Republican Senator Tom Cotton published this opinion piece in the New York Times with the headline, "Send in the troops. The nation must restore order. The military stands ready." Cotton was urging President Trump to send active duty military into American cities for a, quote, overwhelming show of force against demonstrators. But where would a president actually get the authority for that, to turn US troops on fellow Americans? Cotton said there was a centuries-old law that would give Trump exactly that power. It's called the Insurrection Act. Lest anyone misunderstand, Cotton tripled down on Twitter, quote, "Let's see how tough these Antifa terrorists are when they're facing off with the 101st Airborne Division. Quote, and if necessary, the 10th Mountain, 82nd Airborne, 1st Cav, 3rd Infantry. No quarter for insurrectionists." No quarter, which Cotton, as a former army officer, knew meant take no prisoners. Kill them all. A war crime under the Hague Conventions. And this was him calling for no quarter on the streets of America. Cotton's fact-free bloodlust was so over the top that New York Times staffers revolted against a decision to publish his essay. The paper's opinion editor, who ran that column, resigned in disgrace. The Times later said it should not have run the piece. To this day, though, that former Times opinion editor and a bunch of quote-unquote centrist voices insist there was nothing wrong with publishing that piece, even as many of us recognize that what Republicans like Tom Cotton were calling for was undemocratic to its core, a demand for state-sanctioned violence against critics to bring them to their knees. Today we know that this idea, this concept of weaponizing state power, was becoming more and more popular within Trump's inner circle in that same year, 2020. We now know that inside the Trump re-election campaign and the White House, President Trump's allies were laying the groundwork to stay in power after the election, with violence if necessary. Violence under that same Insurrection Act that Tom Cotton had written about. How do we know all this? because special counsel Jack Smith told us. According to the indictment delivered on Tuesday night, Trump formed a plan after the 2020 election to install a loyal DOJ lawyer, Jeffrey Clark, as his acting attorney general. So Clark could mobilize the department to claim there was massive election fraud and press swing states to void Joe Biden's victory. But according to this new indictment, on January the 3rd, 2021, 3 days before the real insurrection by Trump supporters on Capitol Hill, a White House lawyer told Clark, who's identified in the filing as co-conspirator 4, that there was no fraud in the election and that if the defendant remained in office, nonetheless, there would be riots in every major city in the United States. That's when Clark, Trump's man, his co-conspirator, replied, quote, "Well, that's why there's an Insurrection Act." It wasn't just Tom Cotton, referring to Black Lives Matter protests in summer of 2020. Trump's people in 2021 wanted to use the Insurrection Act to keep Donald Trump in power with violence against their fellow Americans if need be. Trump's allies basically wanted to pretend an insurrection was happening across the country so that they could rise up and squash it with military force. So it's a bit ironic that when an actual insurrection happened on January the 6th, they denied that it was actually an insurrection, the same people who wanted to use the Insurrection Act against others. Let's be clear about this. The 45-page Jack Smith indictment, the United States of America versus Donald J. Trump, which dropped Tuesday evening, outlines 4 charges against a former president, the first time a former president has been indicted for crimes committed while in office. And while that 45-page document doesn't use the words coup or insurrection to describe the crimes against democracy allegedly committed by Trump, that's what it was, a coup attempt followed by an insurrection. It was always premised on the need for violence. The indictment even lays out how, as Trump supporters violently attacked the Capitol and halted the proceeding, and, quote, as violence ensued, Trump and his co-conspirators exploited the disruption by redoubling efforts to levy false claims of election fraud and convince members of Congress to further delay their certification based on those claims. They exploited the violence. And they never hid, even before the 2020 election, that violence was at the core of their plan to stay in office and stave off any protests. But Trump's interest in state-sponsored violence was clear well before Joe Biden beat him in November 2020, even before Tom Cotton published that Times essay in June 2020. Donald Trump, the sitting president, was talking about it right in the open.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
We could fix Portland in, I would say, 45 minutes.
That's the way it has to be. There has to be retribution.
There has to be retribution. Here is a president who we now know wanted to literally cripple his political opponents at the time. As former Defense Secretary Mark Esper recalled in his memoir, Trump asked him about the social justice protesters, "Can't you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something?" Trump's cronies were equally keen on violence, whether of the state-sponsored or mob-like variety. Here's General Michael Flynn, former Trump national security advisor and convicted and then pardoned criminal in the weeks ahead of January the 6th.
It's not unprecedented. I mean, these people out there talking about martial law, it's like it's something that we've never done. Martial law has been instituted 64 times.
Yes, that was former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn justifying the use of martial law, of military rule, as a means to overturn the election and keep the Trump administration in power. But that wasn't their only strategy, because Texas Representative Louis Gohmert filed a lawsuit against then Vice President Mike Pence, which would have essentially forced him to overturn the results of the election. And when that suit was thrown out by a federal judge ahead of the 6th of January insurrection, here's what Gohmert had to say.
Basically, in effect, the ruling would be that you got to go to the streets and be as violent as Antifa and BLM.
That was January the 2nd, 2021, encouraging violence and telling Trump supporters on national television to take to the streets, just days before Trump supporters would storm the Capitol. These comments were even flagged by Capitol Police analysts who feared his speech would promote actual violence on the day, on January the 6th. But if you thought what we saw in 2020 and 2021 was quote-unquote unprecedented in terms of the incitement of political violence, if you think Jeffrey Clark, per the new indictment, telling a White House lawyer that they'll just use the Insurrection Act to suppress pro-democracy protesters is bad, just wait until 2024. Wait until next year. Because with each Trump indictment comes a new call for violence and more fuel for Trump's vicious base.
If that, for example, they do say Jack Smith says, okay, I'm going to put Donald Trump in jail.
I think it's a very dangerous thing to even talk about, because we do have a tremendously passionate group of voters. I think it would be very dangerous.
Former President Trump warned that death and destruction is possible if he's indicted.
He's got the baseball bat next to Alvin Bragg's head, obviously inciting violence there.
If you around with us, if you do something bad to us, we are going to do things to you that have never been done before.
Threats, intimidation, abuse. It's horrifying. And yet what we're seeing from Trump isn't actually new in American politics, sadly. There has always been this strain of far-right violence and incendiary rhetoric in the US, especially targeted against minorities, against people of color. In fact, Congress tried to deal with that kind of violence a long time ago with the 1871 Enforcement Act, better known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. Passed during the Reconstruction era, the act was designed to stop terrorist groups like the KKK from using intimidation and violence to suppress the black vote. It lives in U.S. Criminal Code under Section 241, and it's all about protecting voters under the 14th Amendment, aka the right to vote. Section 241 had some high-profile appearances in American history in cases of voter suppression and violence against voting rights activists, including the 1967 Mississippi burning trial, where more than a dozen KKK members were charged under the act for the murder and disappearance of 3 civil rights workers. The list of people charged under that law is full of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Now joining that list, former president and GOP presidential frontrunner Donald Trump. In Tuesday's indictment, Jack Smith accused Trump of violating Section 241 by pursuing a, quote, conspiracy against the right to vote and to have one vote counted. And let's be clear, it was black votes Donald Trump was targeting. How do we know this? Well, in a series of failed voter fraud lawsuits back in 2020, Trump went after cities with high populations of black voters, cities like Atlanta, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And while those lawsuits were not unlawful themselves, what Trump did next, per the indictment, was, after failing to overturn the will of largely black voters through those lawsuits, Trump attacked those exact same states with his infamous fake elector scheme and pressured state officials to, quote-unquote, find him more voters. So put simply, Trump's words and actions are horrifying, but his tactics actually not that new. He was carrying on a bigoted tradition of suppressing the black vote in America through any means necessary. Now, in a normal world, you'd think this type of behavior would push a presidential candidate out of the race, especially after an event as violent as the January 6th insurrection. But no, Trump's poll numbers have actually gone up and continue to go up after each indictment. And so it has now come to this. Donald J. Trump, the first president ever to be impeached twice, will now campaign for his old job while facing 78 charges in 3 separate criminal cases in New York, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Charges for which he could, if convicted, face hundreds of years of prison time. Just the 4 charges announced by Jack Smith this week could net Trump a 55-year total jail sentence. Including civil suits, Trump will be bouncing back and forth between Republican presidential debates and 6 court trials. 6. And there may soon be a 7th. He could still face charges in Georgia for his scheme to try and find around 12,000 extra votes there to overturn Joe Biden's victory. Already, police have begun erecting barricades in Atlanta in anticipation of those charges and a violent backlash from Trump supporters. How do you ensure the security of all those court proceedings in all those places? How do you protect the judges, the jurors, the lawyers from the wrath of Trump and his most dangerous supporters? Back in May, when a jury unanimously held Trump responsible for sexually abusing and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll, the trial judge thanked the jurors for their service and then told them, quote, "My advice to you is not to identify yourselves. Not now and not for a long time." All of the everyday Americans who sit in judgment of Donald Trump are doing so at the risk of their own safety, and not just in court, but at their voting precincts too. How are we going to secure the 2024 election under this kind of pressure from Trump, his supporters, the GOP? How are we going to protect American democracy? And perhaps crucially, how will my colleagues in the media cover all of this heading into 2024? The multiple trials, the 78 counts, the encouragement of violence from a political movement that relies on violence. This isn't a traditional horse race. There are no both sides here. 2024 is now in many ways a fight for America's survival, a contest between messy democracy and bloody authoritarianism. Last time, our democracy survived, but only barely. Are we really prepared for the next time?
It is Friday, the 4th of August of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, our little Yorkie, is the door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the diner of life. Put that in your hopper. Okay, see what I did there? I do it all the time. All right, well, it's not just a liquid diet, though the liquid diet predominates on Fridays, just so you know, okay? Not that I imbibe that much. Most of my alcohol goes in the food, but a French 77? No, that's not going in my food. It might go before, during, or after my food, though. Maybe all three. Though I got to tell you, once again as a reminder for those of you who are in the know, be very careful with the French 77. I think 2 might be enough. It might be a little bit too much, because even though it is the most balanced cocktail in the history of cocktails, and this is not just an opinion, not just, it is truly a fact. But nonetheless, though it be the most balanced, it be very potent as well. So take care. All right. Well, Donald Trump is getting his comeuppance, isn't he? Let's hope it still keeps coming up. We need more comeuppance of that fella. And do we still we don't know who co-conspirator number 6 is? Yeah, as much as I probably wanted it to be Fitton, because I just hate that guy. You know, he's like a stormtrooper type. Paid by Leonard Leo, by the way. So let's not forget about Leonard Leo's hand in all this. Nonetheless, it's looking more and more like it might be Boris Epstein. Yeah, Boris Epstein, born in Russia. Okay. And I just want to remind folks that they keep saying there's no Russian connection, and Boris is just like proof of it right there. Then you got Lev Parnas and all those other guys. So they're not really from Russia, they're from Ukraine, but still. All right. No Russia connection, even though the Mueller report said, yes, there was, and he actually indicted and convicted in many cases absentia of dozens of Russians involved in the violent takeover of the United States of America. We forget about that, and somehow the media never seems to mention it. Yeah. I saw that Donald Trump wants to use these indictments to relitigate the last election. So how many court cases did he lose? 63, 64? This could be the 65th that he loses on that argument. Except this one might put him in the slammer. Might. God, one can only hope, but it's never going to happen. We won't do it. No. They'll get somebody. They'll do whatever they have to do to get this guy off. Or at least, I don't know. I would be happy if they just put him on an island somewhere. Maybe even an island with a high-rise and his name on it. gated type community. Just put the guard shacks so that the guns are pointed in instead of out. Actually, we have one of those right now, except without the high rise. We could put them on Guantanamo. I wonder what the zoning is on Guantanamo, what the Cubans say can be built in that area. I wonder if they can. Zoning in Cuba. Anyway, yeah, can you imagine the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings on that? I can, because, I'm a fiction writer in other personas that I have. Personas. There's only one persona. It might be fragmented, but still only one. That's how I can tell that I'll never be able to use insanity as a defense, because I know too much about myself. Yes. Okay. It's Friday, and we haven't even begun imbibing the French 77s because it's way too early and would knock me on my butt and I wouldn't get the things done I need to get done in the rest of the day, and it's a busy day. Okay, so, we had some thunder roll through last night. At first I thought it was like my mom opening and closing her closet. Sometimes her rollers will resonate, and I'm like, I've never heard Mom roll that closet door like that. And it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what the hell? And I started to get up, and I realized that is thunder. Rumbling thunder coming through here. But I was just too tired to get up and look. Some flashes of lightning illuminated my room here, the mothership, several times after that with booming thunder. And then I got up this morning to, activate everything here in the mothership. It's working all night, of course, but, wake things up that need to be woken up for me. And I went outside, and there was not a cloud in the sky. I expected to see splatters of water everywhere. Nothing. But we had some rumbling thunder last night. And it was, shall I say, exciting? I guess so. It upset the dogs. The dogs want to know what the hell is going on. I had to reassure them, it's only lightning and thunder. And they go, oh, only lightning and thunder? That's the scariest things to us. There's 4th of July, and then there's lightning and thunder. There's no just lightning and thunder to dogs. I'll let you know. Okay. Well, why don't we... Oh, we had a particularly long clip, but I just thought that Mediasan's clip there was succinct in its length and needed to be, part of what we're trying to get out here, and that is, we told you Donald Trump would use violence. He's that kind of frat boy type that probably did all sorts of bullying things, like locking kids in a closet, laughing. I'm sure he did that stuff growing up. Okay, what do we have in store for you? Well, Hassan pointed out that violence has always been at the core of his putsch to stay in power. Now, I pondered using putsch because putsch by its very definition has a violent connotation to it. But I liked it anyway. On the rest of the menu, Ed Mullins, the loudmouth ex-head of the NYPD Sergeants Union, was sentenced to 2 years in a federal prison for stealing $600,000 from union members. Well, you know what they say about cops. No honor among thieves. Continuing on in the Bistro Cafe, Florida banned the advanced placement psychology course over LGBTQ content. Can you believe this? What a petty little Napoleon Mussolini he is. And Oregon's Greater Idaho movement echoes a long history of racism in Oregon. Well, I've been echoing that quite often. There is a lot of racism still. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Agence France Presse is pursuing a copyright case against X formerly known as Twitter. And 2 U.S. Navy sailors were charged with spying for China. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. The bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and down just a skosh, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could possibly send us what you might spend on, I don't know, how about an espresso-type coffee drink? If you could send those funds to us once a month, and thereby becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it does help us pay our bills and all the other costs that keep this powerhouse of resistance resisting as a powerhouse for over a dozen years. Oh my. But we thank you for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. And we also thank those of you who might just be so generous in the future, because it looks like like Rust, Nazis never sleep. My God. But thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter still, and on Mastodon, Spoutable, and I don't know, are we going to get over on Blue Sky? I'll have to talk to Tom about that. You can find us at Netroots Radio, and Tom takes care of all of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, I don't know, wherever. I'm Justice Putnam everywhere, so you look for me at Justice Putnam and you're bound to find me. And as an incidental little tidbit of info that I've been giving for years and years, I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime, and that's where you can find the real reportage. Because I don't know if you can tell, we kind of riff here a bit, just a little. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter as only a placemat, I'm sorry, we'll activate it and be more active on the other platforms real soon. You can find us at West Coast, at Cookbook West. If you want to look for West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, I'm going to have to be, I think I'll be able to change that to something better. I got locked into Cookbook West, but what are you going to do? Anyway, you can, most importantly, please pick up podcasts by way of Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, iHeart, TuneIn, everywhere but Stitcher. You can find us on Spreaker, but just not Stitcher. If I said Stitcher, I apologize. Spreaker, not Stitcher. Okay, thank you. Thank you, SiriusXM. How dare you? Anyway, let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And I don't know, who is this written by? It looks like it's just staff at the New York Daily News. Brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The disgraced former head of the NYPD Sergeants Union, Ed Mullins, pleaded for mercy yesterday, Thursday, before a judge sentenced him to 2 years in federal prison and 3 years post-release supervision for eluding his union's treasury. Any sentence is tragic, Manhattan Federal Court Judge John Kirtle said, but The tragedy of the sentence is certainly caused by the defendant's actions. Just keep that in mind in terms of court cases. It's not thoughts that they're being tried over. It is actions. The firebrand ex-union chief, that's a nice way of saying he's a loudmouth racist. Back to the article at hand. The firebrand ex-union chief said he had lost more than his post upon his federal arrest and conviction for plundering $600,000 from the Sergeants Benevolent Association through bogus expense reports. Then he whines and says, I'm a better person for all of this. If this had never happened, I wouldn't have known how to become a better person. Please don't put me in jail with all the convicts I've been responsible for putting in there. Mullins, 61, saw his legacy tarnished when he was stripped of his gun and shield following that October 2021 raid on his Long Island home and the union's Manhattan offices. He surrendered on charges in February of 2022 and pleaded guilty in January in a deal with the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office. Mullins, who asked for no prison time, said he was in a dark place after becoming a convicted felon. And the judge basically said, no, there's lots of light in the cell you'll be in. Don't worry. Prosecutors said Mullins billed the union for home appliances, a relative's college tuition, and that's not cheap these days, meals at high-end restaurants, designer clothing, what's this guy, a metrosexual, jewelry, and other pricey purchases through fake or inflated expense reports. In the fallout over the Mullins probe, Small Business Administration citywide secretary Paul Capitosto was ousted after the federal indictment said he rubber-stamped Mullins' inflated expenses without requiring receipts. After joining the NYPD at age 20, Mullins rose to detective and then sergeant before becoming president of the fifth largest police union in the country in 2002. He remained head of the union for almost 2 decades, and I should add, pretty much put on the map how police unions were to behave, and is pretty much as loudmouth racist, and that's summed up here. In his final years on the force, the loudmouth labor boss developed a reputation for incendiary tweets, directing racist and misogynistic comments at elected officials and their relatives. Sounds familiar, huh? Sharon Bernstein of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Florida has told school superintendents that an advanced placement psychology course offered to high school students violates a new state law prohibiting instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity, the nonprofit that develops the courses said yesterday, Thursday. The Florida Department of Education has effectively banned AP psychology in the state, the College Board said in a statement referring to the guidance. The move is the latest by the administration of DeSantis to limit instruction about LGBTQ issues and race in the state. DeSantis is challenging Trump for the Republican nomination for president in 2024 and has made battles over cultural issues a centerpiece of his campaign. Florida this year banned a new AP African American Studies course, saying it lacked educational value and historical accuracy. and violated state law on how race can be taught in the public classrooms, especially to white kids. I added that. While Florida officials said the psychology curriculum could still be presented if modified to comply with the law, the College Board recommended that school districts refrain from teaching the course for now, rather than presenting the material without the content on sexual orientation and gender identity. To be clear, any AP psychology course taught in Florida will violate either Florida law or college requirements, the College Board said. Therefore, we advise Florida districts not to offer AP psychology until Florida reverses their decision and allows parents and students to choose to take the full course. A Florida Department of Education spokesperson denied that the state had banned the psychology course, as contended by the College Board. They said the same thing about the race issue, which develops AP courses that help high school students gain college credits. Just 1 week before the school starts, the College Board is attempting to force school districts to prevent students from taking the AP psychology course, said Education Department spokesperson and propagandist Cassandra Palelas. We encourage the College Board to stop playing games with Florida students and continue to offer the course and allow teachers to operate accordingly. But, it's not Patelas, it's Palelas, did not respond to a question about whether the state had advised superintendents that the course violated the state law. Discussions between the state and the College Board about the psychology courses began in May. In the letter that was posted by the College Board on its website showed the state reminded the organization about its new law banning instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in all but health courses from which parents can opt out of sending their children. The state asked the College Board to audit its course material and modify any content that did not comply with the law or rules set by the State Board of Education. The College Board said that modifying its courses in such a way would make them ineligible for college credit and would also violate academic standards. This final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays is by Leah Sottle from High Country News. In the 164 years since Oregon became a state, many people have tried to redraw its wide rectangular boundaries. Secession movements punctuate its history, spearheaded by groups promising that by breaking away or creating new states, they would be making life better, safer, less infringed upon, more free. So far, none have succeeded. The latest movement, the Greater Idaho, seeks to slice off almost everything east of the Cascade Mountains and add it to Idaho, uniting the right-leaning portions of the Beaver State with its more conservative neighbor. Nearly 24 people conceived the idea over pizza and soft drinks in a La Pine, Oregon restaurant in 2019. Organizers frame Greater Idaho as a natural byproduct of Oregon's urban-rural divide, shorthand for how populous cities can sway a state's politics. The idea is far-fetched. In order for Eastern Oregon to become Idaho, Oregon's dominated or Democratic-dominated legislature, Idaho's Republican-dominated legislature, and the divided United States Congress would all have to agree. Still, the campaign has gained attention, garnering articles in national media outlets. In 2021, The Atlantic called it modern America's most successful secessionist movement. But less attention has been paid to the underlying motives and how they fit into the Northwest's long history of racially motivated secession. Over time, Greater Idaho has slowly revealed itself to be something of a poisoned apple, framed as a gift to disconnected rural people, but actually a front for far-right culture war talking points, including racist ones. The movement's website and leaders echo Trumpian rhetoric about illegals and lambast Oregon for education programs about black history and public health measures that prioritize communities of color. During the first year of the COVID-19 restrictions in 2020, Mike McCarter, a movement leader, told a regional website that Oregon protects Antifa arsonists, not normal Oregonians. He added, it prioritizes one race above another for vaccines and program money and in the school curriculum, and it prioritizes Willamette Valley, where Portland is located, above rural Oregon. In 2021, Eric Ward, then executive director of Western State Center, a Portland-based pro-democracy think tank, accused Greater Idaho of simply reviving what the Oregon Capitol Insider described as a white ethno-state dream. The center's advocacy arm later sponsored anti-Greater Idaho TV ads. But McCarter pushed back. Calling us racist seems to be an attempt to associate a legitimate grassroots movement of rural Oregons with Hollywood stereotypes of low-class, ignorant, evil, ugly, dirty Southerners. Yeah, well, you're Oregonians. Yeah, just to be clear. And he said that in a statement posted alongside photographs of Ward and Western State Center's board, who are all black, and the center's staff. Ward's words mark anyone with Greater Idaho sign or a Greater Idaho hat as targets for violent Antifa members. Meanwhile, prominent races were fired up about the idea. White nationalist Jared Taylor touted it on his podcast. People who live out in the continents of rural sanity, they don't want to be governed by people who live on those islands of urban insanity, he said. The audio was repurposed for a video on the far-right social network Gab, where former Fox News host Tucker Carlson is considered a trusted media source, and no one would get banned for posting a swastika. Users there buzzed about Greater Idaho. Articles and clips on the anti-immigrant website VDare also promoted it. One blog said that Greater Idaho would free Eastern Oregons from the anti-white totalitarian leftists who rule the state. A video warned that Oregon won't protect its residents from thugs, illegal aliens, communist rioters, and other undesirables. Because Greater Idaho is unlikely to become a reality, people dismiss it, said Stephen Piggott, a program director with Western State Center, and that he believes is dangerous. People are not connecting the dots, he said. The people who want to create a white homeland are backing it. Okay. I would suggest go to our show notes and links diary and read the rest of this article, because it gives a very succinct history on the extreme racist, in fact, codified in the Oregon Constitution. That past is, the historical references are all laid out in the article, so go read it. All right, let us now get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, build it and they will come. So what's needed to construct an epic film? High-stakes events are good, extraordinary characters a must, complex and nuanced situations help, add some A-list actors and a world-class director and you're pretty much there. And such is what we have with Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, based on Burton Sherwin's '05 biography. Saying that Oppenheimer was complex is true enough, but what's examined here is his intersection with complex events. Innovation from military necessity goes back to the catapult, and when there appeared the potential for a game-changing device from what had been the mostly theoretical sphere of particle physics, those in this field were suddenly in the limelight in an existential race not to be second to develop it. And this race was occurring against a backdrop of competing visions for societal organization, capitalism versus communism, which precipitated a paranoid and delusional response from every part of the American power structure. It's onto the shoulders of Cillian Murphy that playing Oppie, as he was called, falls. Oppie the physicist, the family man, the womanizer, the politician, and Oppie the potential destroyer of worlds. And he soars in this role of a lifetime with support from Downey Jr., Damon, Pugh, and Blunt. Moviegoers aren't unfamiliar with existential stakes, except that of late we've cordoned them off in the metaphorical, a la the Marvelverse. Oppenheimer hits home because really it's all of us, here and now, who are characters in it. As is noted in the film, we're still near the dawn of the era Oppie helped create. Looking at who's in control of nuclear arsenals these days makes optimism a hard sell. And if things go wrong, there won't be any sequels. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. The balance of power shifted from Congress to the presidency during the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt and has remained there to this day. This shift in power has been due to a number of factors. For example, Congress has failed to assert its authority by not taking the lead in the creation of legislation in domestic and foreign policy and ceding much of this power to the executive branch. Congress has also not passed legislation that effectively limits the power of the presidency. Finally, Congress has proven unwilling to robustly oversee the actions of the president and executive agencies. For example, the reluctance of Congress to assert its authority in regard to war powers has led to presidents having almost unlimited power in this area of critical importance to the nation and its people. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that the United States and Mexico signed the Mexican Farm Labor Agreement. It became known as the Bracero Program. The word bracero can be translated into one who works with his arms and refers to farm workers. This program allowed Mexican agricultural workers to enter the United States on a temporary basis. There was a shortage of labor due to the U.S. entry into World War II. II. Large American farm owners were clamoring for cheap labor. By 1945, more than 100,000 Mexican migrant workers were employed through bracero contracts, mostly in western and southern states. Most were farm workers, but others labored on the railroads. The program continued until 1964. More than 4.5 million individual labor contracts with Mexican workers were awarded as part of this program. Many of these workers faced exploitation and discrimination. For example, some of the workers had to subject themselves to fumigation by DDT before they could enter the United States to work. These Mexican workers were often paid less than white workers performing the same labor, and they were often cheated out of their wages. The workers were required to work long hours under often grueling conditions. Despite this exploitation, the bracero program did have some minimal protections for pay and working conditions for those under contract. Farm owners unwilling to meet even these low standards began to hire undocumented labor to skirt the rules. Labor organizer Ernesto Galarraza wrote a book about the program called Stranger in Our Fields. In it, he recounts a worker explaining, quote, "In this camp, we have no names. We are called only by numbers." Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all night hawks in the diner of life. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 63 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low to mid-90s. Sunny throughout the day with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the low to mid-60s, not nearly cool enough. Winds will be out of the northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. And then sunny skies tomorrow and hot. Highs in the upper 90s. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Overnight lows throughout the weekend will be in the low to mid 60s. And daytime highs will be in the mid to upper 90s. So that's what we have to look forward to for our weekend. Grass pollen is rated as the moderate level of pollen that is floating around and attacking us as we speak. The air quality index for the region, though, is in the good range at only 15 parts per million, so that's almost sweet. Daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so take care for that. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.13 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 71%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 65 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 71 and mostly cloudy, and they continue to have a thunderstorm advisory. Rome is 80 degrees with showers in the vicinity, and they have a thunderstorm advisory as well. Kabul is 78 and clear. Kyiv is 90 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 85 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 85 and clear. Melbourne, Australia is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees and mostly cloudy with a small craft advisory on the bay for heavy winds and choppy seas, though it's a bay. Chicago, Illinois is 80 degrees and partly cloudy with a heat advisory. And New York, New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. France's international news agency, Agence France-Presse, says it is pursuing a copyright case against X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, in an effort to secure potential payment for its news content. The news agency said it applied on Wednesday to a Paris court to compel Musk's rebranded company to provide data it says is needed for assessing the remuneration owed to AFP. The news agency announced the legal action in a statement. It said it is seeking payment under EU intellectual property rules that cover neighboring rights, which allow news outlets and publishers to seek payment from digital platforms for the sharing of their work. France was the first EU country to adopt the rules into national legislation in 2019. The agency's statement claimed that it has faced a clear refusal from X to discuss the copyright protections that allow news agencies to seek compensation from digital platforms, and in a tweet, Musk called the case bizarre. News companies push for the EU copyright reform amid worries that quality journalism is declining as ad revenue gets siphoned off by the digital giants.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Julie Watson and Lolita C. Baldor of the Associated Press bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. 2 U.S. Navy sailors were charged yesterday, Thursday, with providing sensitive military information to China, including details on wartime exercises, naval operations, and critical technical material. The 2 sailors, both based in California, were charged with similar moves to provide sensitive intelligence to the Chinese, but they were separate cases, and it was not clear if the 2 were courted or paid by the same Chinese intel officer as part of a larger scheme. Federal officials at a news conference in San Diego declined to specify whether the sailors were aware of each other's actions. Both men pleaded not guilty in federal courts in San Diego and Los Angeles. They were ordered to be held until their detention hearings, which will take place on August 8th in those same cities. U.S. officials have for years expressed concern about the espionage threat they say the Chinese government poses, bringing criminal cases in recent years against Beijing intel operatives who have stolen sensitive government and commercial information, including through illegal hacking. The pair of cases also comes on the heels of another insider threat prosecution tied to the U.S. military, with Justice Department in April arresting Massachusetts Air National Guardsmen on charges of leaking classified military documents about Russia's war in Ukraine and other sensitive national security topics on Discord, a social media platform popular with people playing online games. U.S. officials said the cases exemplify China's brazenness in trying to obtain insight into U.S. military operations. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte coeur. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.